Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people that I've connected with in the industry over the years, most of whom are all just a little bit more famous than I am. And today, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you, from the seminal band Klaatu, Terry Draper. Welcome to the show, Terry.
Hello, Tommy. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it is my pleasure. Now, I know that you are most known for the band Klaatu, but there's been an awful lot of other things you've done in your life, and something had to bring you into the music. How did you get started when you were younger, Terry? I
was an avid record collector when I was very young. Pre-Beatles, in fact. I had all of the Beach Boys 45s and the Four Seasons, and I was a big fan of Phil Spector's girl groups and Gene Pitney and all of the Bobbies, and there were many of them. There was Bobby Vinton and Bobby V and Bobby Rydell and a bunch of other Bobbies. But it all started when I was 5 or 6 years old. I was living with my grandmother and my parents, of course, and I had to share a room with my uncle, who was only 10 years older than me. And so after school, we would go to our room, and we had bunk beds there, and he would start playing his 78. So at the ripe old age of 5 or 6 in grade 1, I was listening to Elvis and Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers and Little Richard and Chuck Berry. I got a crash course in rock and roll very early and became a great collector of records and a big music fan. And then the Beatles spangled North America on the Ed Sullivan Show. I got caught up in that and thought to myself, maybe I could play music and not just appreciate it and collect records. Be an aficionado. I could actually be a musician.
Nice. Now, I know that Klaatu was started by Dee and John. They got fairly well into the recording process before they brought you in. How did you get involved with Klaatu in the first place?
Well, that's a bit of a misnomer, that whole thing of John and Dee starting it. Because there was a band prior to Klaatu called Mud Cow that the three of us were in, and another fellow was a 4-piece band, and we were doing all originals. It was the early 70s, 1971, and we were even playing some of the Klaatu songs, like Craig Dear Christine, and a couple of others, I can't remember which. But that band was struggling because we couldn't get any gigs because we were playing all originals. So we ended up learning Jumpin' Jack Flash and Proud Mary, which I'm not too proud of. And then we managed to get some gigs. And as luck would have it, that band collapsed at the Trenton Hotel on a Saturday afternoon after a meeting with Mindy the stripper, wherein she decided which songs out of our repertoire she would undress to. I remember going back up to the dressing room after the meeting, and Dee said, "That's it. I'm done. When this gig is over tonight, I'm not in this band anymore. I'm going back to not being in a band." The bar band, it wasn't fun back then, 6 nights a week and a Saturday afternoon matinee. And then, a year or two later, I hear from John. I kept in touch with John. We were close, actually. We went to public school and high school together. And he told me about this thing, a recording he was doing with Dee and Terry Brown. And they'd done 2 songs and used a session drummer. And they weren't completely thrilled, although Sub Rosa turned out great because that's Whitey Glenn playing the drums on that. Anyway, when it came to doing Dr. Marvolo, I think was the next song, John called me in and said they wanted to have a drummer who would put more than the 3-hour session time in and be a permanent part of the band and help it get going. So, I missed the first couple of songs, but got in pretty early, back in part of the band again.
Right. Now, you're known as the drummer primarily from the band Klaatu, but you are a multi-instrumentalist and you're also a guitarist, lead singer. So, from what I understand, when the band was near the end, you guys were prompted by the record company to actually get out on tour, but 3 guys trying to do all those orchestral arrangements and so on didn't quite cut it. So you brought in a couple of the guys from Max Webster, and then you guys all went out front?
Yeah, that's how that came about. It was the recording of the 5th and final album, Magenta Lane, and Capital Canada allowed us to do that album, and we had just been dropped by EMI in LA. And Rupert Perry, the president of EMI, allowed us to sign with Capital Canada with a non-recoupable contract so that we could make a new record and not have to worry about the debt we had with Capital for the world, which was quite generous and quite unheard of. But anyway, part and parcel of that with Capital Canada was we had to go and tour the album. As luck would have it, Max Webster had just broken up, and I knew a few of the guys, and they were really skilled, fine players who were quite familiar with the whole live scene in Canada. And so we came out of the box looking like pros. John and Dee and I hadn't been on stage since Trenton. It had been over 10 years since the Trenton Hotel fiasco. I think that was the last time the three of us played live anywhere. So it was a bit unnerving playing in front of, 5,000 people in Lethbridge, Alberta, some arena. But we pulled it off with the help of the guys from Max, Dixie, Gary McCracken, Mike Gingrich, and Gerald O'Brien, a friend of ours from a band called Nightwinds.
Nice. Now, I know that you co-wrote some of the Klaatu songs. I'm curious about Calling Occupants. Where did you guys get the inspiration for that huge song?
Well, that was John and I. We were right into UFOs back then, science fiction, and the whole Von Däniken Chariots of the Gods, and all of that kind of stuff. Matter of fact, 2 years ago, my wife and I were in Peru and flew over the Nazca lines and saw some of the stuff from Chariots of the Gods. That was a nice fulfillment of a dream. And anyway, John and I were right into that and studying it and reading about it. And we found this book called The Flying Saucer Reader. And in the book is this chapter about the International Flying Saucer Bureau, which was a real entity in the 50s. And in this story about the International Flying Saucer Bureau, they invite all of their members worldwide to recite this message mentally. And there's the message on paper in this book. And when John and I are reading it, and it says, calling occupants of interplanetary craft, calling occupants of interplanetary craft, please come in peace, we beseech you. Help us to teach the ignorant ones on our planet about peaceful cohabitation, stuff like that. And what they were trying to do, and they scheduled this event for March 15th, 1953. And it was called World Contact Day. They wanted all their members to mentally recite this message so that they could reach out with their brains and contact the UFOs and the aliens. And John and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. What if we turned this into a song and it became number one and got massive radio airplay? Wouldn't the radio waves emanate further than our puny brains? Maybe we could reach the aliens. And so that's how that song came to be. Unfortunately, I've had no aliens knock on my door.
I dreamt I was an alien once. Anyway, that's quite the...
I dated a couple.
Yeah. Was that back in the 70s? Because I think I was in the same bar. Yeah. Oh, boy. Now, another interesting song that came out of Klaatu that you co-wrote was December Dream, a tribute to John Lennon.
Yes. That's a bit of a dodge, that is, because I wrote the song in 1976, and when it came time to do a final album, I presented it, and John and Dee thought it was good, and John said, it's just not quite there, so him and I sat down and wrote the chorus together, and then when we were recording it, this was 1981 we were recording it, and Lennon had recently been assassinated, and the song was called December Dream. So I threw in the line from his song, God, the dream is over, at the end of the song. And so we sort of redirected it as an homage to John Lennon because of his death on December 8th, that December Dream.
Right, yeah. Now, I know that you've done other things outside of Klaatu. What was the story with Rational Youth?
I didn't work with Rational Youth. Dee did. During the live Klaatu 1981-82, which only lasted 9 months, by the way, about halfway through that, Dee bailed. Dee had set up a recording studio in Buttonville, Ontario, called ESP, with another friend, John Jones. And that's where we made the Magenta Lane album. We took all the money that was our advance for making the record and gave it to Dee so that he could buy, whatever, a bunch of gear that we would need to make the record. And when we were finished making the record, they would have the gear to make payments on or whatever and carry on as a recording studio. That's what Dee wanted to do. He really liked that more than playing live. And so about halfway through the tenure of Klaatu Live, Dee quit. And we hired a great guitar slinger named Dave Cooper, who's passed away a few years ago. But Coop was a great guy, and he played on a bunch of Ian Thomas records, and he's a fine player. But anyway, so I was just talking about, so one of the bands that Dee recorded there was Rational Youth for Capitol Records. I was not involved.
Okay, just goes to show that you can't believe everything you see on the internet.
I never even met those guys.
Well, yeah, I've had some of these situations happen before where I neglected to fact check one thing, and that's the one thing that, anyway. Editor's note, Terry suggested that I delete this section about Rational Youth so that I wouldn't look bad for asking a question that I hadn't fact-checked, but I decided that he discussed some things that were pretty interesting in that section, so I've left it in. Now, I know that you've recorded several solo albums, and at one point in time, did Dee and John play with you on Light Years Later?
Yes, actually. There's a song on that album called Winter in Peru, which was a candidate for the final Klaatu album. I wrote it around 1981 and made a demo of it at United Media Studios in Thornhill. A friend of ours, Brian Bell, was working. And Johnny played the 12-string and some organ. Dee played electric guitar. I played drums and a whole bunch of other stuff, and a bunch of people helped me sing vocals, and I put that song. It didn't make it onto the Magenta Lane album, so I put it on Light Years Later, my first solo album in 1997. So yes, the three of us are playing together on that song.
Okay. Now, the majority of the musicians that I've met over the years and talked to and so on, who were strictly full-time musicians, are the ones that inevitably weren't the happiest. And the guys who had something else in their back pocket seemed to be the ones who ended up coming out further ahead. Now, I know you did other things. You were into roofing for a while. And how did you get into that?
I fell into that. I did not go to the guidance counselor of high school and say, hey, if you've got a job that's like really nasty, dirty, hot, cold, exposed to the elements, what do you got? And she said, you want to be a roofer. No, that didn't happen. It was a matter of, being between bands in the early 70s and, trying to support oneself. And a friend of mine did roofing and said, hey, well, you want to come out and carry shingles for me? I'll pay you $2 an hour. And yeah, okay. And then, say, here's a hammer. I'll show you how to do this. And so I started doing that even throughout the recording of the first Klaatu album. We all had jobs because we used downtime at the studio. We'd have a session once a week maybe. And so that's why it took 3 years to make that album. And that's why we had to have jobs, because there was no other income. I was the head of the 45 department at Sam the Record Man at Young and Dundas for about a year during that mid-70s while we were making the first album. But it was mostly the roofing that I would fall back on, and because you could make good money doing that. And when the band broke up in 1982, I went right back to roofing and turned my back on the music business, much like the music business had turned its back on me, or so I thought. At the time, I wasn't that unhappy about the demise of Klaatu. And I look back on it now, and it was like the best thing that ever happened. because quitting the music business afforded me the opportunity to get a real job, a real life, make real money, and have all the nice things, as well as it left me free to do whatever music I felt like, whether it was bossa nova, folk, country, whatever I felt like doing. Nobody dictated to, no, that song's not good enough, it's not going on the record. No, you can't do that, we don't want to hear that. I just did whatever I felt. I had complete freedom, artistic freedom, and I still enjoy that to this day. Nobody tells me what to do, and I'm quite happy about that.
I totally get it, and I'm on side with you because I had come to the point where I'd been on the road for a long time and playing in other people's bands, and I thought I was done with the music business. Turned out I was done being a spoke on other people's wheels. And then I quit, and I got married, and I got a day job, and when I decided to get back into the business, I had the same attitude. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to have fun, or otherwise I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to play any covers or whatever that somebody wants me to do if I'm not comfortable with it. And, when you do have an income, it certainly frees up your ability to play what you really feel. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. Now, how did you get into the restaurant industry?
That was a similar kind of event, just fell into it. I like bars. I like going to bars. I can walk into a bar and then leave an hour later with a bunch of new friends. And I'm just a gregarious, affable kind of guy, perhaps, Tommy. I'm not quite sure. But I have a real comfort zone. I guess in part that was playing in the bars in my youth. It's just a comfortable place for me to be. And so when I got a little long in the tooth, a little too old to be crawling around on people's houses, putting roofs on, I started doing decks and fences, and then I moved inside and, renovations and hardwood floors, all that handyman kind of stuff. But also along the way, I ended up managing a bar for 10 years, in fact, and then I had my own bar for a little while until I had an argument with my partner who was drinking all the profits. But that's another story altogether. And I was a bartender at various bars and just, to have an income and have some fun. So just one of those things you fall into in life. I've had lots of different jobs.
Right. And as we were saying, that gives you a lot more freedom with the music. And you've been going strong as far as recording for years and years. You never really stopped working in the studio. Do you have a studio at home presently?
Yes, I've had a tape recorder, which, is the heart of the studio since the early 70s. I've never not had the ability to record my songs. And so today I still have a studio. It's in a floating room in the basement. And I'm in there a lot, fooling around. And I have, the gear's not bad. I still use an old mixing board, a 32-channel board, because I like outboard gear. I have a bunch of MIDI gear and delay lines and reverbs and all that stuff that's outside of my computer. A lot of people these days do everything internally. And I still like the old hands-on mixing board effect, and allows me to more latitude. I don't know, I guess I'm just old school. But I've had the ability to record for these last 50 years.
Yeah, well, we're plugged into a mixer that's going into an audio interface to record this, so I feel you. Yeah, hands-on, I like that. Now you have a new project. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the new album is called Lost. It came out a week ago, last week, and it's available now at terrydraper.com. And I'm pleased with this one. This one, it doesn't have anything resembling a single on it, which is okay with me. This is the quirkiest collection of tunes that I've put together yet, I think. But I'm quite pleased with the result. The Lost title might sound a little negative to some people, but the full title is Not All Who Wander Are Lost. That's from Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. And one of the things I love saying to Anna is, I'll look over at her, we're driving somewhere, and I say, we've never been on this road before. And my idea of the perfect holiday is getting lost in some other country and expanding my own horizons and looking at new culture and food and stuff and new music, stuff like that. I have a song on an album from a few years ago called Turkish Delight, and it's not about the candy bar from our childhood. I wrote it when we were in the island of Chios in Greece, and on a clear day we could see Turkey, and at night we could see the lights. And the song is about my Turkish delight, about going there and finding out what Turkey is all about, the mystery of it all. And that's how I get inspired to write songs, is a lot from traveling. I don't just send home a postcard and a photograph. I scribble down some lyrics and poetry and come home and turn it into a song, and there's my little travelogue, these various songs. That's a great deal of fun for me.
I'll bet, yeah. Now, one of the songs that you've got videos for the whole thing, I think. One of the songs called Home. I'm assuming that was inspired by the current global pandemic. Yeah,
it was. And I had no intention of doing a pandemic song. Everybody I know was doing one. And I said at the outset 6 or 8 months ago, no, I'm not jumping on that bus. That bus is too full. Everybody's doing it. And, a couple of months ago, I was just tinkering around at the piano, and I had this odd chord progression. And I just started, with the word. Then the next thing you know, I'm singing, somebody told me I should stay in the house. Somebody told me to stay at home. Well, I don't mind it. I like to be alone. And then the whole thing unfolded about, somebody said I should cover my face. So I covered it up just in case. And it just came, the song's called Home, and it's about just stay at home, and if you have to go out, send your clone.
Yeah, and I sense an overall positive vibe from that. So my assumption is that you are doing what you need to do, and you're taking it all with a positive attitude.
Yeah, just go with the flow, and don't be part of the problem. That's the main thing. Just go along with it, and let's get through this, We can do it.
Together. So there was a movie called is it the Sharon Incident? And you had a small part in that?
Yeah, that was my big acting career. There was this, a good friend of ours. She writes screenplays and does stuff like that. And this is a project she was involved in. Her and I have written a couple of musicals together. And we met because our spouses were in community theater. My wife Anna and her husband Mark have been in half a dozen theater productions in the local Aurora Community Theater. And so we socialized from time to time, and Mary and I hit it off, and she found out that I used to be in this rock band, and she's a screenplay writer. So when we first met, we had 30 or 40 meetings. And she wrote this screenplay called "Sell Out: The Klaatu Story," and it's not a documentary, but a biopic about Klaatu. And I introduced her, of course, to John and Dee and Frank Davies and Terry Brown, and she had meetings with all of these people to get all this background information. And actually, she's just recently found someone who wants to put this thing together and put it on the big screen, so we'll see how that turns out. But one of the projects Mary was involved in was the Charon Incident, and they needed to shoot a little scene in a bar, and I was hanging out at the end of my street at the local bar, and I asked the owner, I said, hey, can we do a shoot here on a Sunday night after you close? It'll only take a couple hours. And she said, sure, come on in. So I got the venue for this scene, and they conscripted me to be the bartender because I just fit into it so well. So that's how that came about. It's a very small part. I'm not even sure if I have a speaking line in that.
Well, we'll have to check it out, the Quran Incident. Aside from all that, I know that you've shared the stage and mingled with some other bigger names as well, and some common ground with Daffodil Records. So I know that among the associates you've known, Tom Cochran. Do you still have a relationship or friendship with Tom?
Well, I haven't seen Tom in a number of years till I bumped into him a year ago, actually. We were at the Phoenix Concert Club downtown. It was the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame induction night, and as luck would have it, John and I were nominated for our song calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, and we went there to receive our award and be duly inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And Danny Taylor was on the bill that night. He was being inducted in for co-writing Make Me Do Anything You Want. He was in Foot and Cold Water. And him and I had go way back. We had crossed paths many times. It was really nice to see him. So we spent most of the evening hanging out. And Tom Cochrane was hired to play at the gig after all the awards were done. And I hadn't seen Tom in a lot of years. In fact, Klaatu was hired to play on a song of Tom's in 1978. I think the song is called Tobermory, and we're the band that played on with him on that song. So I go way back with Tom, but we haven't crossed paths a lot in all these years. I don't play live. I don't go out to concerts much. I do most of my work alone in the studio, so I'm not hanging out on the red carpet with the gang that often. But I was last year.
Nice. Well, I don't have any more questions for you, Terry, but I do like to give my guests on the show the last word. So if there's anything that you feel passionately about that you want to talk to the people about, this is the time. Well, Deer in the Headlights comes to mind. I don't have anything to say particularly. I just like making music. And this is my 17th solo album I've just put out. So there's quite a repertoire sitting there at terrydraper.com if you feel so inclined to go and find out what I'm doing. I describe it as progressive pop, mostly just pop tunes that have got some complicated arrangements and psychedelia going on and backwards stuff and weirdness and sound effects. But when you strip all that away, they're generally just little pop tunes like the song Home we talked about earlier. You can sit and play that at the piano. It works just fine all by itself. But that's it. So if you want to know what I'm doing and where I've been, come on over to terrydraper.com and find out. Awesome. Well, sir, I started to do this podcast when the pandemic broke out because we needed to do something for fun. And thanks to you, this has been another fun one. So until such a time as guys like you and I can sit down and have a beer and tell a few lies face to face, I thank you for being on the show, and until next time, cheers. Thank you, Tommy. I look forward to sitting down in the trenches with you and trading war stories. That would be fun. Let's do that in the near future. That sounds like a plan. Well, there you have it, episode 35 of Tommy Solo's Famous Friends featuring Terry Draper. Don't forget to go to terrydraper.com and check out all of his releases. And without further ado, here is from his latest release, Lost. Please enjoy.
What can't I see from my window? What lies beyond my front door? Wondering which way the wind blows, and hoping to be lost once more. Where the sun goes, I follow, over the hill and hollow, looking ahead to tomorrow. Yesterday's gone, no sorrow. Here is where I belong, and here I shall stay. On the far side of beyond, day after day. Day after
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production. That means that I've done all the research, guest acquisition, etc. And the theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends was written by me and recorded with a little help from my friends in the night crew. Now, if you like the podcast, why not subscribe? We're on all the major platforms, Google, Apple Music, etc. Until next time, thanks for tuning in and checking us out, and we will see you again.